So I'm going to show you the chain stitch technique, but on this separate piece of fabric, just because it was proving quite difficult to for you to see it on the other fabric. So I'm just going to zoom in. So we're coming up through the fabric, and this is point A on the instructions, and then we're going back down as close as you can get to that point, but I'm going to kind of exaggerate the stitch here just so that you can see what I'm doing. But you're basically coming down next to that first stitch, and then you're coming up a stitch length away, and you're coming up through that loop. Pull it tight and then go back down next to that stitch. So all of your little stitches are kind of in pairs. And then again, just a stitch length away. Pull it tight. And then down next to the stitch. So the only change is when you get to the top of your heart and you want to finish a line of chain stitch. So instead of putting two stitches next to each other and starting to form your next loop with your thread, you're going to just put a stitch over the top of that chain to kind of finish it off. So it's like a little anchor stitch on that last chain, and then you will reverse the process. Oh, I've started at the wrong point. Oh no, I haven't. Yes, I have. So we're going back down. I should have started at the top rather than one stitch down. And then two little stitches. Start your next chain. And then just keep going like that until you want to get to, when you want to finish a line, we'll just do that same stitch again. Instead of going next to each other, we're going to just go over and secure that loop, that last loop there. So that is the traditional way of stitching chain stitch, and that's the way we've shown you in the instruction booklet, but I am just going to show you a different way that is actually a lot easier. So this is my cheat version of chain stitch. So to start with, we're going to stitch a tiny little anchor stitch, as small as you can, and then we're going to come up a stitch length away, and this anchor stitch is going to be the first stitch. We're going to go through with our needle and come back round and do, like we did for the traditional version, a little stitch next to that first one. So there's your first chain. We're going to come up a stitch length away, and instead of looping the fabric, you've got a little anchor there to make your chain. So go back down next to that one, come up a stitch length away, and loop it round the previous stitch. So it looks slightly different. You might argue that it looks slightly less chain-like, but this way is a little bit fiddly and potentially requires you to kind of have some way of holding the hoop so that you can have both of your hands free, because you're kind of catching the loop there, whereas this way is a little bit easier. So I'll just show you this way again. It's that little anchor stitch that starts you off with this method, and then each stitch becomes the loop that you go back under. So it's really easy. And with this one, you don't need to finish it off when you get to the top of the heart. You can just finish like that and then start another row by just starting with another little anchor stitch. So tiny little stitch, then that becomes the first one that you loop through. Just push your needle through, and that's your first chain. And you can go flatten it out and then go back down. So 2 ways of doing chain stitch, but basically fill that little heart with vertical lines of chain stitch. Now we're going to do the long and short stitch, which is this heart, and I've got 4 strands of brown thread on my needle. And we're going to start by doing alternating short and long stitches on this bottom edge of the heart. So you want your longest one to be about 8mm. So I'm going to start in the middle just because I think that'll be easier to then manage doing long and short stitches. So that's my longest stitch. So I'm going to do one about half the size, a bit more, and just go all the way along the edge of this heart. And now I'm going to do a long one. And then a short one. So just keep alternating like this. I'm going to do one more long one there. Now I've got this first row of long and short stitches. I'm going to come back down. I'm going to start doing a row of stitches that are the same size, and I'm going to go back down into the previous stitch. So you kind of keep that like staggered effect, because your stitches now are all going to be the same size, and you're going back down through the last stitch, through the top of the last stitch. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see. And then you'll just keep going back and forth along these rows, filling in with stitches and doing the same size stitch into the end of the previous stitch. If they're not exactly the same, like that one there, it doesn't really matter. As long as they're all vertical, you'll get this effect. So you kind of see where you've gone before along that line. They should probably be all the same length ideally. They're a little bit random. You just work your way up the heart like that, filling in the whole shape. So as I go along the heart, I'm just kind of adding in long and short stitches to these, to the side of the heart. So it's just kind of being quite subjective about it. It's not a science. So a little short one and then a long one here. Until another little short one. You won't be able to get them because of the curve of the heart. It's not going to be the same size stitches every time, but I've kind of got to the outermost edge of the heart now, and so then we'll just start filling them in across this line, and then we'll kind of reduce them in as we go along these bits. So just kind of fill the shape using this technique and adapt to the edges of the shape. So when you get to this kind of top part of the heart, your stitches are just going to need to be whatever length they need to be to fill the shape of the heart. So you won't be able to continue kind of doing the same size stitching. You'll have to alter them so that they fit in the shape of the heart. So just use the edge as your guide, and then once you're kind of nearing the end, or you've completed, you can just go back and fill in any areas that look a little bit bare. I've just got a few patches where the stitch hasn't filled it as much as I'd want to, so I'll just go back and fill in some of those stitches retrospectively. So just carry on. So that's my long and short stitch heart pretty much done. I've gone in and kind of cheated at the ends where I wanted to kind of fill it out. I haven't got a kind of specific stitch that I'm going back down into, but I've just added in some extra stitches to kind of fill it out, and I'll probably do that and go back and fill in some of these patches here as well. But you get the kind of the general technique, and then you kind of need to ad-lib a little bit around that. So now we're going to look at basket weave stitch. So we've got a little grid here to show you, but we're going to start by doing vertical long stitches. I've got 6 strands of thread on my needle, so I'm going up and down those vertical lines. So now we're going to go back over using the horizontal lines, and we're going to weave through. So what I meant to say was, again, keep an eye on your tension here when you're doing these long stitches, so don't pull them too tight, but they also don't want to be too baggy. So I'm going to do that first over, and then I'm going to come up at the horizontal grid mark, and we're going to go over and under, just doing a little weave. And it's easier to do it with the blunt end of your needle, this weaving. So pull your thread. So I'm going over and under and over again, and then always finish off your line of thread by going down to keep it secure. And then I'm going to go up. And I'm just going to go over, under, over, under. And back through. Oh, I've missed a line there. I'm going to pull that out again. To get that woven effect, make sure you're just always doing the opposite direction to the thread that's gone before. So because I've gone over this vertical one, I'm now going to go under it. So I'm going to go over, just otherwise it won't be weaving. So it's always got to be opposite to the line that's gone before, and then you create that crisscross effect. And pull it down and then secure it at the end of the line. So just keep stitching and weaving your thread through the vertical stitches and finishing off by going down at the ends and tie and knot off at the end when you finish. And that's your basket weave stitch. And I'll be back with part 3 tutorial tomorrow.